inform all board member attendees that this meeting is being live streamed and archived for access at any time by our community members on the internet within 24 to 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. We'll do the pledge. I'll try to rise. You could rise or sit. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the
republic
for which
it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so roll call.
Mrs. Sparber.
Here.
Mr. Carey.
Here.
Mr. Lawler.
Here.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Here.
Mr. Rivas. Mr. Rivas. He's here, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes.
Saw him earlier.
And Mrs. Witt.
Here.
Mrs. Junk is absent.
Okay, so with 6 members present, we have a quorum. Would anyone like to move something from consent to new business? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
And a second? Second. And a roll call.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas. Mrs. Sparber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Does Mr. Rivas have his audio turned off?
I cannot see him.
I cannot either.
I see him, but it doesn't show that his audio off, so I don't know.
It says, he chatted me that said I have control of his audio. I'm not sure if I do. I can
So
look.
is that you, Tim? Is that you for hosting?
Tim, maybe?
No,
Pedro's audio?
it's he's not on mute. I just muted him and then unmuted him.
So Pedro, you can hear us okay? Tim, any idea why we can't?
Hey, Pedro, do you want to try exiting and then re-entering?
Tim,
Tim, is it showing on your end that he's in?
No. There we go. He's muted on his end. I just asked him to unmute and to start video.
Sean, in the meantime, do you want me to
yeah, I was
introduce Brian?
Chat. So I think it's fine for us to move ahead with the vote for 5 in favor.
Aye.
Yeah, we did. I think we've got the 5. Is that right, Beth?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll move on to board and superintendent salutes, and hopefully Pedro can join us here.
Okay, thank you, President Sparber. As we have in the last couple meetings, we've had the opportunity to meet a few of our new administrators, and so I'm proud to welcome as a new night Brian Zerfis and his family. And Brian will be an elementary assistant principal. He'll be serving at KME and KSS. So with that, I'll let Brian unmute his phone, introduce his family. And
hello, everyone. I'm gonna try and talk over a very socially inept child here who loves attention. This is Colton. He's 9 months old, and this is my wife, Megan.
Hi.
We live here in Yorkville. Colton has certainly enjoyed us being home during quarantine, and he's nearly walking now, which has been a scary, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Quite the excitement for us. I spent the last 10 years in the classroom, last 9 in Oswego. Hey, I got to talk now, dude. Last 9 in Oswego, with the last 3 in 5th grade at Long Beach Elementary. Really excited to make the switch. I've also spent a lot of time coaching, so both on the private side through club volleyball and at the high school, I just resigned as the head men's varsity coach in Oswego East for men's volleyball. So I'm really excited to go all in on administration, make the jump here, and really excited. Got the opportunity to be a part of a Canvas training today and learn a little bit about that and attempt to wrap my head around all the acronyms and everything that is Kaneland. So really looking forward to getting on board and hopefully seeing everyone in person and out of the digital world here soon. You have anything else you want to say?
Welcome.
He's quiet now.
Yeah, of course he's quiet now.
Well, thank you for taking a couple minutes to join us, and thank you for sharing, introducing your family. Like you shared, Brian, it will be nice to have everybody in person as soon as we can. So again, welcome to Kaneland, and I'm proud to have you to be a knight.
Looking forward to it.
It was nice meeting you guys.
Nice to meet you.
All right, any other superintendent salutes?
No, that's all we had tonight.
All right. So let's see, we will move on to public comment. The board values public input to inform our decision-making and to provide information and insight into what is happening throughout the district. Board meetings are held to conduct the business of the Board of Education, are required by law to take place in public. However, they're not public forums. We use the public comment section as an opportunity to listen to our stakeholders. For that reason, the board does not enter into debate or respond to questions spontaneously or without proper investigation and deliberation. In most cases, concerns or questions requiring follow-up will be referred to the superintendent. Due to COVID-19, the Board of Education meeting this evening is virtual, and those wishing to comment were instructed to email Dr. Todd Layden, superintendent, by today at 3 p.m. Dr. Layden will read those public comments out loud. You are encouraged to seek a private appointment to discuss matters concerning individual students or staff members. And so I think there is one public comment tonight.
Yes, we do have one. I will, if you're okay with President Sparber, I'll go ahead and read that.
Sure.
Okay. KEA, this is submitted on behalf of the Kaneland Education Association, from lead negotiator Susie Axel. KEA and the Board of Education have a deep history of cooperation regarding the insurance plan that is offered to employees. This cooperation has been through a long-standing contractual committee that consists of KEA members, SPEAK members, administration, a board member, and our insurance broker. Recently, the impartiality of this committee has come into question by some members of the Board of Education, even though there's no evidence, nor was it brought as a concern in recent negotiations. Dr. Fuchs has brought historical information that proves that this committee has been impartial and has done what is necessary to keep the costs as low as possible with renewals that trend well below average. Although the members of the committee have heard these statements and are disheartened that their hard work and professionalism is being questioned, they continue to take their job seriously and have made the best decisions to keep our KEBTF healthy and bring back excellent renewals with a continuation of current benefits. Every meeting is centered on looking at the balance of the KEBTF and discussing actions to keep the fund healthy while mitigating a cost increase to the Board of Education and members to every extent possible. The committee analyzes every possible action by discussing if the action would have mutual benefit to employees and the district, what impact the action would have on the KEBTF, and if the action would save money or cost money. The committee does not take action without knowing the answers to these questions. KEA would like to publicly thank the members of this committee for its work and due diligence making the best decisions for its members and the board. Recently, the Board of Education asked the Insurance Committee to investigate adding a high deductible healthcare plan as an option to save money for both the employees and the board. The Insurance Committee spent many months this year discussing the plan and was presented at the last board meeting. The committee ultimately voted 10-2 against adding such a plan, as the plan had very little cost savings and was not negotiated. The Board of Education then instructed Dr. Fuchs and Hub International to bring back a high deductible plan with richer benefits to make it more attractive to those employed by the district. Stephen Morkos from Hub stated at the last meeting that bringing forth a richer high deductible plan could run the risk of underfunding the KEBTF. In a year that saw our healthcare fund go to the lowest level ever and an atypical high renewal, underfunding the KEBTF could have had catastrophic consequences. KEA would like to express great concern that the Board of Education could act on adding a high deductible plan without negotiating or having the plan vetted and accepted by the Insurance Committee first. The committee has not seen or discussed the plans that are being presented before the board tonight, nor was the topic of adding an insurance plan brought to the recently concluded negotiations. KEA has received guidance from IEA Legal that the addition of a high deductible plan would be considered a significant change in wages and terms of condition of employment, considering that the Board of Education may contribute to an HSA account or change insurance contribution levels for some members. If the Board of Education wants to continue action on this matter, please be advised that the association will consider it as such, and any action may result in a demand to bargain letter being presented. Again, that's on behalf of the Kaneland Education Association. That's all I had, President Sparber, for public comment.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda will consist of the following action items: the approval of accounts payable and payroll May 2020, approval of minutes of the May 11th, 2020 regular meeting, approval of resignations, terminations, and employment of staff, approval of IASB annual dues, approval of the athletic training services contract, approval of mobile classroom application, approval of Illinois Central Amendment through May, approval of the 2020-21 hot lunch and milk fees, approval of student handbook second reading, and the following informational item, the student suspension data report. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
And I think that's maybe Gail, and was there a second by maybe Ryan?
Yes.
Sounds good. And a roll call.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas,
Me? Can you hear me?
now I can.
Ah,
Miss,
okay.
Mrs. Sparber,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 6-0. So we'll move on to J1, approval of driver's education fee with public hearing.
Yes, annually, as you know, at this meeting every year, we talk about driver education, and we are required to have a public hearing. And so I know that you will, in a second, when I give it back to you, President Sparber, you will ask for a public hearing. And as part of the public hearing posting, Dr. Fuchs also instructed anybody that wanted to share any public comments to contact me also by 3 o'clock as of today. So just so that you know, when you get into the public hearing, I was not contacted, so there are no public comments from anybody as part of the hearing. So with that, I'll either turn it over to you, President Sparber, or Dr. Fuchs, if you want to start the hearing.
So I'll open up the public hearing at 7:15. And then I think Dr. Fuchs, I think you give an overview. Is that the right process?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Okay.
At tonight's meeting on the agenda for the driver's ed, I always provide the board with some financials. It's always a year prior because this year is not finished yet. Our state reimbursement hasn't come through, so we don't know exactly how much will be coming. And so some of the other, the salaries aren't completed yet because they'll go through August. So there's just a variety of things. So we use the year prior. So using the 2018-19 school year, you can see that we collected a total of $76,419.69 from driver's ed. That includes both the student fees and then the state reimbursement. And again, the state reimburses a year in arrears. So the money that we received in 18-19 was for the 17-18 drivers courses. It's always in arrears. The expenditures for drivers ed in 18-19 totaled $246,153.87. So we had expenditures over revenues in the amount of $169,734.18. In that year, we had 225 students enrolled in the classroom, 191 behind the wheel. You can see the various costs per student. The cost per student served is a little over $1,000. It's $1,094.02. And then the net cost that takes away the revenues is about $754.37. Again, we're charging $250, which is the most amount that the school code allows. And the net cost is about $754 to the district. There is a resolution that the board basically is approving. And then that's it for the overview of the program.
Okay, so as Dr. Layden mentioned, there are no public comments associated with this. So I'll close the public hearing portion at 7:17. And then the board can have discussion. Does anyone have a comment or question? No? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion that the Board of Education approve the resolution to establish the 2020-21 driver's education fee for Kaneland High School at $250 as presented.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
And a roll call.
Was that seconded?
Mr. Lawler.
Thank you. Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas,
Aye.
Mrs. Sparber,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
and Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. We'll move on to J2. I would like to table J2, the discussion of high deductible health insurance plan. So I'll make a motion to table J2. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
And a roll call. Or unless there's discussion, I guess I should say. No, and a roll call.
Mrs. Pavlak,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas,
Aye.
Mrs. Sparber,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
and Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. We'll move on to J3, approval of chillers at Stewart and Shields.
Yes, as part of the information sharing in the presentation tonight, as you saw, probably Mark Payton is with us. So in a second, I'll let Mark and Dr. Fuchs share an update on this and just a note of appreciation for the work. And also we're thankful for the timing while COVID-19 was unexpected with this two air conditioning chillers going out. Actually, the timing was about as good as we could get, not having students in those buildings for the last month of the school year. So while untimely, it was about as timely as we could have an urgent issue like this arise. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fuchs and Mark, and they can share some information, and obviously you'll be able to ask as many questions as you would like.
Thank you very much, Dr. Layden. As you can see from the memo, when Mr. Payton and the trained technician went to start up these systems this year, some of the steel in the refrigerant line was severely rusted. Both of the systems are 22 years old. Those are the two schools that opened in 1998. And this is the original system that was installed with the schools. To make both systems temporarily safe, they did evacuate the refrigerant into storage bottles until either the system is repaired or replaced. That way, we would know that the schools are still safe, as that being our number one goal. With that being said, neither Stewart nor Shields have a working air conditioning system at this point. And so Train, which is the HVAC system that we use across the district, has offered 3 possible solutions for the board to consider. I'd like to mention that these 3 solutions were given to us last week, and they were estimates at the time. You'll notice in the top of the table, it says approximate cost. I'll give you some more information in just a moment. Our 3 choices are we can fix the existing system. The approximate cost for that is between $90,000 and $120,000. We expect that if we did that, it would probably only last 1 to 3 years, depending on what other parts would need to be replaced and fixed. We could refurbish the existing system. That would last approximately 8 to 10 years, or we could replace the existing with a new system for approximately $450,000 to $470,000 with approximately 20 to 25 years. As a part of the project, and Mr. Payton's going to go into a lot of the details. Let me just continue a little bit longer with the overview. With a part of the project, if you're going to replace the chillers, the board may want to consider also replacing the cooling towers because they're also the same age. And you can see the cost to replace those was estimated at $125,000 to $175,000. That total cost is what's called a turnkey system with Train. Train is a part of the Omni, hang on one second, the Omni, what are they called? Omnia Partners Cooperative is a part of the cooperative. The cooperative bids out various systems, gets all the bids in, and then awards it to one vendor for a variety of different kinds of systems. So both the equipment and the service or installation have been bid through the cooperative. When Train gave us these estimates last week, they had not had, they had their original technician on site, and I may have Mark fill in a little bit more of the process here, but they needed to do more information, and that's why they gave us estimates. We did receive a firm proposal today that Mark is going to tell you more about, but the proposal that we received today is higher than the amount of money that I've asked for in the recommendation. In the recommendation at the bottom, I've asked with an estimated cost not to exceed $625,000. We need to, if the board determines that they want to replace the system at the end of this conversation, the money would be $690,000, not $625,000. And with that being said, then what I'd like to do is ask Mr. Payton to take the board through what they can expect with regard to the system, and then also why we're recommending replacing the system rather than option 1 or 2. So Mr. Payton, go ahead.
Before you go on to Mr. Payton, if it was already bid, why is there the variable?
Mr. Payton's going to talk about that.
Thank you.
At the end of the day, Train was real reluctant to give us numbers because they didn't have all of the information. They did the best they could, and then Julianne and I processed that information the best we could to get a board memo out. But there's a lot of variables that go into it, like demolition, how much piping needs to be done, things like that, which they had not had their engineering group look at yet. We were in the process of getting that done, but in the interest of getting a board memo out by Wednesday, we collectively had to do the best we could to put an estimate on it. So that's really the big difference. Now that they've been in there a couple of times and had their systems engineers take a look at it, and they were able to pin it down to a firm number. But that's why there's such variance. It's not that they gave us bad information before. They just had incomplete information with which to give us information, and then we had to do the best we could.
All right, and where I'm getting lost on that is Dr. Fuchs said this was already bid,
Yep.
and you're saying that there's variables, so the two don't make sense to me just yet. I'm missing.
Okay, the train bids a system through this cooperative. So they'll bid, in this case, it's a 160-ton chiller with labor to install. But that's not specific to our system. That's in general, this is how much it costs to do this for this type of system. That's how they do it for the cooperative. And they'll do that for multiple different systems. Like they'll do univents and chillers and controls packages and things like that. And this cooperative will go out to several different suppliers and get bids. So they'll do train, carrier, etc. And then they'll take the best package, whichever supplier puts the best package together for their partners. And like colleges and universities, K-12 school districts, municipalities all participate then in this cooperative. So it was bid, just not this specific project, but general projects were bid. And that's how they determine who to award the contracts to. But then each location is going to be specific in terms of the actual installation. And that's where you're going to get your variation. But like the equipment part of it, what we're paying for in that is going to be what anybody else who participates in that cooperative, the specifics of their installation is where they're going to see differences from one to the next.
So how
But
much?
but hold it, the amount though that is bid is still checked against our specific projects to be sure that the pricing is within what they quoted or what was awarded. Mark?
Correct, yes.
All right, so of the 450 to 470, how much of that's equipment?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have it in front of me.
I'm not going to hold you to it. Is it half? Is it three?
I can tell you. Oh, no, wait. No, I can't because it's all together. Never mind. I've got the price for Stewart and the price for Shields, but I don't have it broken down by equipment.
It's probably roughly half for equipment, and then half is demolition, installation, engineering. Those things all kind of roll up into the other half. But that's real rough.
And that's, I just still don't quite understand. They just give them a ghost building to bid again for? Like, here's a random building and throw a labor number at it?
Well, what they're doing is a typical 150-ton chiller, a typical DX unit, a typical univent, and they give that to multiple suppliers. And then they take the best one for their members.
So is Mark then the difference between what would be a typical unit, then they come on site, then look at the specs for a respective building or project, and that's where there might be that variance that there happened to be this time?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Your face
Was Train who checked it last year? Or is it checked every year?
Most years, yes.
So, because I'm wondering, how did it sneak up on us or on them? It feels weird that two separate buildings failed at exactly the same time. I'm certainly not saying anything. I'm not saying anything about us. I'm talking about maybe they want to sell a couple of expensive pieces of equipment, because it just seems weird that all of a sudden they both failed. They're both catastrophic. And it's like such extensive rust and damage that it seems like we should have seen it before, or they should have.
a lot of it is hidden by insulation. And some of that insulation is starting to fail, and because it's 22 years old too. So yeah, the things are starting to accelerate with the equipment in terms of breakdown. Yeah, I mean, some of these buildings, while they're new relative to, you know, some schools are 60 years old, but the equipment is starting to age out on some of this stuff. And the technician that we were working with, he said, I don't feel comfortable turning this on because these the type of chiller that we have at Shields and Stewart are high pressure systems, and they're inside the building. So you have, like, your chillers for every other building are outside air cooled chillers. If they happen to have a refrigerant leak, that's going out into the atmosphere, which is not good, but it's not a danger to health of occupants of the building. So the real concern there is that we would have a situation where that refrigerant would be evacuated into that small space, and it's just not worth the risk.
Okay, thanks.
Mark, do you want to talk about the fact that we're going to switch over to the air-cooled one? And
yeah, that was one of the nice things that has come out of this whole process is we learned that switching to an air-cooled chiller would be the less expensive option. So it's going to have a lot of benefits for us in terms of efficiency. We're going to get quite a bit larger of a rebate from ComEd for switching to an air-cooled chiller. It's also in terms of safety, because we're going to get that high concentration of high pressure refrigerant out of the building and into the courtyard. And then one of the things I'm sure you've all heard about Legionnaires being associated with cooling towers. It seems to happen a lot at retirement homes, things like that. So when you eliminate the cooling tower by going to an air-cooled chiller, you eliminate the possibility of Legionnaire's disease. So while we treat the cooling towers with chemicals to make sure that it doesn't happen at our schools, it's one less thing that you have to worry about. And it's also a little bit of a cost savings, probably $5,000 to $7,000 a year just in chemicals to treat the water for the cooling tower that we're not going to have to do anymore. So there are going to be a lot of benefits in terms of cost, safety, and overall confidence in the system.
Aren't air-cooled chillers less efficient than water-cooled?
Not in this case, no.
Okay. Sorry, I dropped out for a minute, so I might have missed that already.
So Mark, I know you don't replace these all the time, but in your guesstimation as far as price goes, being in the group where they bid on these things and such, you think it's a fair deal?
Well, I mean, you know, it's a lot of money. So, you know, it always, it's difficult to spend that kind of money. But I mean, yeah, you know, the research I've done in terms of how much to expect for something like this to cost, for an air-cooled chiller, it's fair. I was expecting the water-cooled chiller to be less money, and it's actually more money. So that one was the one that seemed a little out of whack to me. but I was pleasantly surprised when the air-cooled chiller was the cheaper option because there's so many benefits to it.
And that's what I was gonna ask you, if you did some research work, which you did, so I appreciate that.
Dr. Fuchs, I know one of the things that we talked about while trying to assess this with the recommendation with 2 new systems being about $100,000 more than refurbishing the existing system. Can you do a little bit of a breakdown on that analysis and why our recommendation is still for the 2 new systems as opposed to refurbished or repairing the existing systems?
Yeah. So if you take the total cost of each project and divide it out by the approximate longevity of the project, the new system itself is less per year than if you refurbish or just fix the existing system. So it's twofold. It's less per year, and the board won't have to worry about it for quite some time if they make the initial investment at this time.
Then can you follow that one up with the impact on this year's budget and the projected budget for next year? I know our board's always interested to hear what the short and long-term impacts on especially more expensive items can be.
If the board approves it tonight, a portion of it, and I don't know exactly how much yet, Mark, do you know? A portion of it though can come out of this year's budget, and then whatever doesn't come out of this year will come out after July 1. I don't have that specific breakdown, but we know it'll be split over 2 fiscal years because, Mark, I think I heard you say earlier today that Train is ready to get started as soon as the board says what it is, the solution that they want to do. Is that true?
That is correct, yes. And, things like demolition, we can probably pay a down payment on the equipment in this fiscal year, and we can probably get the engineering paid for out of this fiscal year.
So maybe 1/3, 2/3, something like
That's
that.
probably a good estimate, yeah.
Yeah.
I apologize if you already answered this while I fell off the call, but if we only do the chillers and not the towers, are we going to be spending money twice to repeat work?
Well, you're not going to have too much more life left out of your existing cooling towers. So no, you're not doing things twice, but you're probably adding cost in terms of the scale of the project. And, you're going to have to mobilize twice. You're going to have to engineer again, maybe not the full amount, but there's going to be some engineering cost involved in adding a cooling tower, 2 or 3 years down the road.
And with the new system, Mark, you said that one doesn't come with cooling towers.
Well, if we were to choose the new air-cooled chiller, then we would not need a cooling tower.
Right.
Is there any reason to get the architect on record to review anything? It seems like you keep saying the word demolition and things like that, and I'm like wondering should they weigh in?
We can certainly do that, but then that adds cost. And, these are the trained engineers are licensed Illinois engineers, so it's not like using Joe's Mechanical down the street. They effectively have an in-house engineering firm.
Okay, as long as you say if you vouch for them, that's fine.
Yeah. And the thing that when I say demolition and stuff, I mean we're not taking walls down or anything like that. We're dismantling the piping, getting a rigger in to slide the old chiller out the door, and getting a crane to lift the cooling tower out and put the new chiller in. So demolition might be a scary word, but it's not it's not like we're knocking walls down or anything like that. We're opening a door and they're sliding it out. So.
And Mark, the architect will be involved because he's going to have to do the permitting paperwork.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So he will see the plans and the design because we have to have his stamp in order to get it through the ROE to get a permit.
Teresa, is that the angle you were asking?
I'm sorry?
I was asking Teresa, is that the angle she was asking as far as involvement of the architect?
I just wondered if for any reason, yeah, they needed to come in. So I figured it would cost.
Sure.
So we're talking about the budget. I guess I get less concerned about the years that things fall and just trying to keep track of like, this was somewhat unexpected, maybe not totally if they're 22 years old, but somewhat unexpected as far as what we planned. And then I know some things got postponed a year, but presumably those things will come back next summer. So are we in a position that there's a concern for the things that we likely would have slotted for next year, already not having any funds available for next year? Does that question make sense?
It does. And I would say no. I would say that we would have enough money to do what we had anticipated for next year or for this year, next year, because when we do the financial projections, the amount of capital money on an annual basis stays in the budget. What we wouldn't maybe have enough to do is the projects that were put off this year and another $1 million next year.
But it just seems like, will some of those, I guess my question is, will some of the projects, I'm sure the ones we're talking about now will all get done, but will some of those projects that we wanted to get done, will they become urgent? You know, are there things, and maybe Mark, I know that's something you monitor all the time, are there things that, if you're thinking other things will get delayed a year or 2 years, is that significantly concerning?
Well, like I said, some of these systems are starting to age, so we're gonna be more and more concerned every year. Particularly a lot of the new sections, the quote unquote new sections of the high school, they're approaching their 20-year anniversary. McDowell and Blackberry are probably 5-6 years away from stuff starting to hit that number where we need to start worrying about it. So in all honesty, I mean, we're probably going to be needing more and more funds for these buildings over the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're still waiting on our boilers to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are
So I
pretty.
guess maybe to rephrase Shauna's question or add a twist on it of my own, do we need to look at pulling money somewhere else out of the budget so that we can keep our funding levels up for capital and projects?
I think what we'll do is, I think as we relook at reevaluate the CapEx budget plan for the year, take a look at those and see which were the ones that we had, what had to effectively get selectively abandoned along the way, and then see if do we need to consider something else that resembles a line item for these types of repairs. Because as Mark talked about down the road, some of these other things starting to happen, maybe the plan is to now do something minus X and put X aside per year to plan for those, or start to proactively work on some of those while also doing some of the other things that we really want to get done with classrooms and some of those items. So I think you'll see a refurbished, sorry for the pun there, but a CapEx plan coming in the fall in December.
Yeah, because it seems to me that it shouldn't just, likely without knowing the specifics of the numbers, it shouldn't just be a reshuffling of projects, that likely we're going to need to work on finding more money somewhere. And maybe it's not all this year finding 600,000, but over the next couple of years, probably finding more dollars to go towards capital expenditures.
We can certainly start to work toward that.
Try to.
And that's why the univents were on this year for the high school. is because they've been on the plan for a really long time and they're just having more and more troubles every year. But that had to be put off because with COVID-19, there were so many obstacles to overcome. We couldn't get it done this summer, but you will definitely see that back at the top of the list for next year. And then the other one that was put on hold was the science classrooms. And so I can see the high school prioritizing that. But the high school also has the auditorium needs with both the lights and the sound system. And so I could see one of those, if either one of those goes out, we'll be at the board level pretty quickly because otherwise they won't be able to have performances. So and that's in addition to the system kinds of things that Mark talked about. So I'll start to look in the budget to try to figure out where we can continue to put money towards capital as appropriate.
Any other comments?
I was just going to say, I think it's, when we talk about safety, and this certainly isn't the biggest angle. I mean, the safety is, is the most important thing. But when you talk about knowingly having a system that, might not be as safe as it could be, there's also an exposure to liability. I think when you know that a system is old and, if you're talking about Legionnaires, if something were to happen, first of all, it would be horrible and a tragedy, but there's also a financial liability that comes with that. So I guess when I look at these large numbers, that's something else that I would take into consideration.
So Julianne, as far as the recommendation at 690,000 is what you need that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion that the Board of Education direct the administration to purchase and have installed new chillers and cooling towers at Kaneland John Stewart and Kaneland John Shields with an estimated cost not to exceed 690,000.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And a roll call.
Is this each?
No.
That's for both.
Total.
Okay.
Mrs. Pavlak. Mrs. Pavlak?
Gail, you're muted.
Aye.
I'll come back.
Oh, we got her.
There's, okay. Mrs. Pavlak?
Aye.
Mr. Rivas?
Aye.
Mrs. Farber?
Aye.
Mrs. Witt?
Aye.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mrs. Junk?
She said she can't get her mic to work.
Should we move on to Mr. Lawler? And I don't know, Meg, if you can try logging back in. That seemed to work for Aaron.
And Pedro, yes.
And Mr. Lawler?
Oh, you're right,
Aye.
Pedro. All right, motion carries 6-0, and hopefully, Meg, you're not there, right? No, we'll see if she can get back on. So move on to J4, approval of purchase and installation of KHS intercom system.
Yep, we had this conversation briefly, and I shared it in the weekly update. And one of the recommendations was to move it from consent to new business, to have a little more conversation on it, just to give some of the feedback while the timing of it and why we're recommending Pentegra rather than bidding the project. So with that, a little bit of the backdrop. Fortunately, we have Julianne, and then Tim, who's here to host the meeting, can also answer any questions that you have too.
And also Mark Payton is on this one. So Tim and Mark are working together on this project, Mr. Payton and Mr. Wolf. And as they continued to get into the project, they presented the following rationale that you see in the board memo regarding why it would be better to have Pentegra to purchase and install the system from them. What I think I'll have them do is each of them have a couple of bullet points that they can talk about and give you more information on and or answer any questions you might have. So let's see. First of all, the first bullet point, it is legal to avoid the bidding process with this purchase because it is an exemption to the law, because it interconnects and it's a telecommunications system. So the first thing is the board needs to know is that what we're asking is legal to do. Tim, maybe you want to talk about bullet point number 2 because it's with the phone system, and then 3 and 4 are Pentegra. And then maybe go ahead, Tim, you can take away most of that. And then Mark, add in when Tim needs some support.
So the intercom system is intertwined with the phone system so that you can pick up any handset in any classroom and then do a page out through the intercom system. That's tied in very tight and close together. A couple other things along with it. Pentegra has been with Kaneland over 20 years, working in and out of the building. They've done data cabling. They have existing drawings and so on that we're hoping to repurpose some of that cabling that they have already used. We have 19 classrooms that have old wiring that we cannot repurpose. It'll actually have to have new cabling, and if we can use some of the data cabling that Pentegra has already used, it'll save us some money.
Do you want, let me just kind of give you a little background here. The intercom at the high school started to fail. So I started to try and dig into what can we do to get it going? Do we need to replace it? That kind of thing. Through that process, we contracted Pentegra to do a survey of the whole system. And that's when we discovered that there was quite a few classrooms that have wiring that's just not capable of supporting a modern intercom system. So we went about trying to develop a bid package for intercom that would take that into account. And the more I kind of dug into this and tried to come up with this bid package, the more I determined that it is a modern intercom system is extremely intertwined with the IT infrastructure. It's not like a standalone device like it was 20 years ago. It's kind of all wrapped up and tied up into the IT infrastructure, the cabling, the servers, power over Ethernet, all that kind of stuff. So that's when I started talking to Tim about, and we had been talking all along, but this is when we started talking about, is it really a good idea to go out to bid for this, or is it more responsible to just contract somebody like Pentegra, who's already familiar with all our IT infrastructure, and have them do this so that we know that it's done correctly and works with all our systems, because we did not want to do all this work and spend all this money and then have something that wasn't compatible with those IT systems that we already had. So that's kind of how we ended up here. Is that all kind of correct, Tim?
Yeah, and then let me add one thing to it. It's a hybrid system, so it works with the new technology and the old technology.
Yes.
And Valcom is one of those systems that does do that. There are systems out there that only do the new IP network technology and then your old legacy systems. So you got anything to add on the hybrid system, Mark?
Well, and just going back to your point about the classrooms with the inadequate cabling, we couldn't just put in an old system because even like an old like analog type system, because the inadequate cabling we had wouldn't even support that. So it wouldn't support the analog type system, and it also won't support the new IT based system. So we had to install a hybrid system so that we can do both of these and try and take advantage of the existing cabling that already goes to those rooms. Correct, Tim?
Yeah, and I was wrong when I said 19. It's 39 rooms.
30. Yeah, I thought it was more than that, but I didn't want to. So that's how we ended up kind of in this position. The other thing to consider is once we select a system for the high school, whether we bid that or do it through this route, that whatever we end up with is going to kind of be the district standard then, because of kind of the new way you react to emergencies and things like that. You want compatibility across buildings, so you can use one building as a command center if you're having an incident in another building. Once we start down this path, we're not going to want to get we're not going to want to rebid for different buildings, because we want that compatibility from building to building. So it's, you know, once we do the second intercom system, we're not going to want to bid at that point. We're going to want to get whatever we got at the high school, so we have that interconnection and intercompatibility for emergency purposes. I mean, because at the end of the day, the intercom system's good for announcements and stuff, but when you really need it is those big emergencies.
Thank you both. Oops, go ahead.
I can add one other thing too. With the new system being a hybrid also, you can add in different like IP strobe lights, messaging boards, mass notifications. And then as this expands out to the other buildings, that communication can go across to the other buildings from one to another.
Mark and Tim is
from, I'm sorry, but to Mrs. Sparber's point earlier, the systems at Shields and Stewart are aging. They're not too far away from where we're going to need to replace the intercoms there at a minimum. So we want to have a system that we're comfortable adding additional buildings to and having that intercompatibility.
Mark, that's kind of what I was going to ask with the anticipated expense of this being $125,000, being our largest of the buildings with the most rooms. Would Shields and other elementary schools be less expensive?
Yeah, they'll be considerably less expensive. Particularly, a lot of it relies on the wiring that exists already. So, you know, hopefully we don't have the same situation at Shields and Stewart that we did at a big chunk of the high school, being inadequate cabling. And it's a lot easier when you don't have to pull cables. It's a lot cheaper because you're not paying that electrician to run wire all over the place.
As you can see, we have both of these gentlemen working hard on this project because it is so interrelated between the IT and the buildings and maintenance systems. So I just want to say thank you both for working really well together to try to figure out the best solution for the high school and the district. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any questions?
Yes. I didn't go back and research, but was the first number thrown at us 100,000? It was always 125.
Ooh, I don't know that, Pedro.
I know it's in one of Todd's emails to us.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I guess I want to know what changed.
Yeah, I don't have that with me today. I'm sorry.
And was that or before or after the valuation? I don't know when
no
that
idea.
when
I have
that
no idea.
other number was thrown out, because
Okay.
we were ballparking, I think, Mark, weren't we, that it would be
Yeah.
just over 100,000, somewhere in there.
As I reviewed the budget document, that was in the weekly update, the total on that for this project was included at 125 there too. So it was at least a placeholder going back 1 or 2 weeks at the 125. So
like I said, I didn't do the research, but 100 was there. I didn't know if it was 100 or 125. But anyway, it's all good. All good.
Okay.
Now, gentlemen, how far are we from I guess the technology that we're using presently? I mean, is it still? I guess it's a school thing that we still use wiring. There's a point in time where we go to the next level, technology wise?
I'm not aware of wireless intercom. I think most of it is hardwired somehow, whether it's Cat 6 or, you know, some of it's like phone wire, depending on the age of the building and things like that. But Tim, I don't know, are you aware?
That is the latest. It's just IP technology. It runs over the network. I'm not aware of anything wireless. And then as far as intercom systems goes, you know, it's just lost my train of thought there. It's kind of a life safety. We have to have it. It may not get used on the classroom side, but from announcements and security and everything else, it may seem antiquated a little bit, but it's a necessity.
Yeah, it's just like you don't have wireless fire alarm systems either. That's all hardwired. These emergency systems tend to stick with wiring.
Sure. The 39 rooms is that's just basically old wiring that they're replacing there. Is that what I heard?
Yes. Yep. Extremely old wiring. Mark, you work with, I haven't worked with it. Mark has always worked with the legacy system, and I've been brought on for the new technology on the IP side. So Mark, you could speak more on the maintenance you've done with that.
Yeah, and oddly, Pedro, some of the wiring that is of a concern is old, like, because we have some really old sections of the building, but some of it is actually in the A-wing, which is like 17, 18 years old, something like that. So it's odd that when they built that section that they used that kind of wiring. But a large number of those classrooms that are of concern are in the A-wing. I don't know. I wasn't around at that time, so I don't know.
Maybe they're trying to match it up to the rest of the old building.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Pedro, I looked up the memo from before, and what I had in there was 100 to 125. And so on this one, what I put was cost up to the 125.
Sure. Like I said, I didn't look it up. I just remember that number.
Good memory though.
The other thing is what's the potential of them finding more once they start doing the project?
Well, that's you mean more bad wiring?
More bad wiring, or what other elements may fall in place?
Well, that's why we had them do the survey before we even started working on the bid package, because we wanted to understand what we were getting into, so we didn't have surprises down the road. Yeah.
All right, so this is pretty stern as far as the 135 then.
Yeah, they did a very thorough survey.
Every classroom was tested and went through.
Okay.
Any other questions?
This all makes sense to me, and I understand the rationale, and I'm fine with it. I'm just a little leery about saying, well, whenever the rest of it fails at the other buildings, we're going to go with this. I mean, it seems like you're kind of opening yourself up to them charging whatever they want.
Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from.
And actually, I was actually almost going that way as well. I mean, as far as non-bidding it out, as far as, you know, we dealt with them for 20 years. They know our system and stuff. To me, those are requirements you put into a bid, that person, bodies that come in to bid it out, that they have to match all that and to make it work as well as, you know, as far as what the requirements are. right? So,
Pedro, I don't mean to cut you off, but can I just, my question, then we'll move to yours because
sure,
we're going to get lost
go
in
ahead.
where.
Yeah, go for it.
So I get it. I don't necessarily agree. I always prefer to bid, but I guess I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with making the statements that once we do this, all of the rest of the schools must follow whenever their systems need upgrades.
I would at least say that they need to be the same system so they can integrate. There are other Velcom installers.
So, all right, so the software would be the same. So you're telling me it's like buying a Ford pickup. I can go to any dealer, but
Yeah, similar. If you have a Ford pickup or a Ford fleet, you're going to want Ford mechanics.
But what? Okay, so
if Pentegra folded up, you know, a year from now, there would be other companies that could install and maintain Velcom. But as of right now, Pentegra is the preferred installer of Velcom. And I think in the memo there, it says that we'll get a letter from Velcom stating that. And Velcom is a specific hybrid system that we're looking for.
So if things go sideways with this installer, the equipment itself may be good, but we can always go find a different company or bid it in the future and have several suppliers say we want this particular product, install it for us.
That is correct.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Go ahead, Pedro. Thank you.
My apologies. Yeah, I'm always, as far as bidding is concerned. I mean, you can, like I said earlier, you can put up the requirements out there, and then obviously the people that come at you obviously have to be able to show and meet those requirements. So, and I'm up for bidding myself.
Is it possible that down the line, because all of the different schools could be integrated and it's an enhanced safety feature, that there could be grant money or other allocated money for safety reasons that we could use for this purpose?
I would imagine, yeah, that there's probably grant.
That's a good maybe.
Yeah.
Tim, does E-rate come into play at all with these systems, or is that not
not with intercom systems?
Okay.
I will double check on that just to see if any rules have changed recently, but it has not in the past.
Any other questions? Nope. All right, we will move to a vote, I think, if I can figure this out. I'll entertain a motion that the Board of Education direct the administration to purchase and have installed a new intercom system at Kaneland High School using Pentegra with an estimated cost up to $125,000.
Wait, what? 225?
Pardon me?
You said 225.
Did I?
Yes.
Whoops. All right, we'll try again.
I think it was up to 125.
Yeah, I will say that. We'll say I said it right, but I probably didn't speak well. But the Board of Education directs the administration to purchase and have installed a new intercom system at Kaneland High School using a Pentegra with an estimated cost up to $125,000. So Ryan's happy. Is there a motion?
So moved.
All right, in a second.
Second.
And a roll call.
One question.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pedro.
No, thank you. This can be installed before the new school year?
Yes, and if we go to bid, Mark, you could probably talk about this, but I would see it being done before the start of the school year.
You're adding weeks and weeks if you go out to bid.
And no, I know I stated that before. I'm talking about what you're trying to present.
Yes, it will be done before school starts.
Yeah, that was also another consideration as we determined to move with Pentegra for this one. So as Ryan asked down the road, could it be something different? It could, as long as it integrates into the same system.
Any other questions? We'll go on to a roll call.
Mr. Rivas,
Aye.
Mrs. Farber,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk,
Aye.
Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlik.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. We'll move on to J5, approval of handbooks for support staff, first reading.
Each spring, our education support staff, food service, and bus driver handbook is updated and changed and evaluated just similarly to our student course books and student handbooks. So with that, I'll let Julianne, I know there's a bunch of updates in there. I didn't know if you were going page by page, but I'll turn it over to you and you can share some of the highlights.
Sounds really good. Thank you. Before I get started on that, I think Mr. Payton is probably going to leave us because he's done for the night. So thanks again, Mr. Payton, for your work on both the chillers and the intercom system. I know Tim is staying with us. Mr. Wolf is staying with us, but kind of wanted to give him that out like we do at the board. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
For everything.
Thanks, Mark.
So with regard to the employee handbooks, as Dr. Layden mentioned, there are 3 handbooks. The employee educational support staff handbook, that covers the district office staff, the technology staff, and the operations and maintenance staff. And I think, let's see, I think that's the majority of them. And so the 2 changes in there are in that handbook this year are very easy. The one is the holidays. They had noted that the holidays used to be written out, but somehow it didn't. So we just printed out or wrote out the holidays that are included in their handbook. And then the other thing is the harassment policy for all 3 handbooks has the updated policy, which has the correct or current complaint manager name. So really nothing changed. It just has the correct name because the other, the former person was in there. So for the educational support staff handbook changes, those were it. The food service handbook changes, that was minimal as well. Gigi, the director of food service, is required each year to review the document, and then she has to date it that she did review it so that when we get audited, the auditor comes in and looks for that. And so on pages 6, 8, 10, and 11, you'll notice that they've added the review date of May 2020. And similarly, then the harassment policy was updated there. Mrs. Smith in the transportation department did the most changes this year. So let me take you through just a few of those. Let me just take you through a couple of those. So the salary information is just simply the board approved the 3% at the last meeting, so the new schedule got put in there. On page 10, we wanted to add those bus drivers, when they come in to get trained, there's a classroom portion and a hands-on portion. So she just wanted to be more specific about having it hands-on written into the handbook. Additionally, with the minimum wage law, it is going up to $11 starting July 1 of 2021. Okay, and that should say, I'm going to fix that. That should say January 1. Sorry about that. All right, then the next thing is the bus drivers, similar to the SPEAK contract on page 12, they now have 3 personal or emergency leave days, but they used to have 12 sick days. Now they have 11 sick days because unused personal or emergency leave days turn into sick days. So those 2 flip-flopped. They went from 2 to 3 and 12 to 11, which again is consistent with the SPEAK contract. So that is an update. Page 19 didn't change anything, but we provided an example. So if during a year if during a time period where drivers do not bid on a posted route, we would make an exception so that another driver could have that route, even if they've only had their current route for less than 90 days. The reason why we put the 90 days in there in the first place is to provide consistency for the students. But we've had 1 or 2 times when another route is uncovered because nobody will bid on it, and then we have to assign it. And we want to assign it to a person that just got a different route recently. So it all has to do with seniority and the bidding of the routes. Page 20, it's just the 3 allotted personal days. That's updating consistent with page 12. Page 21, the fluid check. We have fluid checkers now that that do the checks of the fluids for the drivers. But if a driver misses their daily fluid check, they're responsible for checking it. And if they take a weekend trip, they're responsible. And so we wanted to get that current language in there as well. It's current practice, but we wanted the language to match the practice. And then the engine oil must be checked before starting the bus. Let's see, page 22. We no longer have the Top Cat fueling system. So that information, some of it was taken out, and that paragraph now just contains the fact that they need to fuel their assigned bus and that they cannot let their fuel tank fall below a half a tank. Again, nothing has changed there. We've just taken out the references to the Top Cat fueling system. We wanted to put in writing on page 22 that a driver should not get off of the bus at any time when there are students on the bus, unless if another district employee gets on the bus. We just want to be sure that that driver never leaves the students alone on the bus. Whether the bus is running or not, they should not leave the bus. So it's in writing. Page 31, we used to park buses at the middle school. We no longer do that. And so we wanted to update that they should turn in discipline forms only to the director of transportation. They used to be able to turn them in both locations, but they don't need to do that anymore. Page 33, the school bus discipline. This is now consistent with the changes that the board approved in the student handbook, and it's updated to reflect Senate Bill 11. I'm sorry, Senate Bill 100. Senate Bill 100. And then lastly is then the harassment policy. So I was really pleased with all of the changes that Mrs. Smith brought to the handbook for this year to make sure that the language reflects current practice and is updated. So with that being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And then I do have a recommendation that the board approve the handbook changes upon first reading. Like Dr. Layden said, the process then, unless if there are any changes, and even if there are, we can put them in there. Next board meeting, you'll see it on consent to be approved upon second reading. So there's a first and a second reading in case if there are changes in between. Thank you.
All right, any questions?
I have 2. The first one was the policy about never getting off the bus when students are on the bus. Do we need an exception for, I don't know, car accident or something like that?
I'm going to say no, specifically for an accident. They would stay on the bus, and then once the first responders arrive, they will take over at the scene at that time. And most likely the driver will stay on the bus because the driver is not supposed to talk to the person that was in the car accident.
Okay, that was just the first thing that popped in the head.
Yeah. So that specific example, I'm going to say we probably don't need an exception. In the handbook says should, it doesn't say shall. So if there happens to be an exception that we didn't think of, should protects the driver as well.
Okay. And the other is COVID-19 has opened up a whole new world. And is there anything that we need to be thinking about putting in not just this handbook, but all the handbooks that helps us in the future?
Yeah, for this handbook in particular, let me tell you what page it's on. Just one second here. We have language. So just one second, because we reviewed it. It is on page 25 of the bus driver handbook.
Go ahead.
Okay, on part G, it says it's a transportation department procedure for MRSA with an asterisk. And what it says is if the district is notified of a MRSA or similar health outbreak, this is the procedure. And so we do have a procedure, but what I will tell you is Dr. Layden and I also talked about this. And what we think is going to probably happen is that once we are given COVID specific instructions, if something needs to be shared with the employees, we will do so separate from the handbook that is annual, if that makes sense.
Which is perfect, Julianne, because one of the things, as we talked about earlier, as these changes, some are mandated on us, some are some local control. So as those happen, Ryan, we have the, based on what we get from the state board or from Illinois Department of Public Health, we will then keep these fairly standard. But then what we do need to update, whether it's within the teacher's contract or speak or with the non-speak support staff, we'll update those groups accordingly. And then if there are changes that do need to come to the board, that would be either policy or handbook, we would make sure we brought those to the board.
And specifically with regard to the food service, they go through a sanitation and safety training. And I'm sure that the IDPH will be updating their training specifically related to food service. So I think we're going to be covered between everything that Dr. Layden and I have shared with regard to COVID.
I guess I was thinking a little bit more big picture, like we get another, I don't know, another outbreak of something or another, and we need to throw the handbook out. Is there like a clause of because of emergency circumstances, supersedes, blah, blah, blah? Does that question make sense?
There's some language at the beginning of it.
Okay.
So in the introduction, just one second.
No problem. I didn't read it.
Okay, so yep, on page 2 in the introduction, there's some of that language that you're talking about.
Okay. All right, as long as it's somewhere, I just wanted to make sure it was kind of big picture thought.
Yep. I'm looking through it to see. There's nothing really specific, but it does do, I think, what you're asking. Yeah.
We do too, Ryan, along those lines. If we needed to, we would meet with the respective groups with either a letter of agreement or an MOU or just a conversation and understanding that if it is bigger picture outside of the contract, we would have that communication too.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move to, I'll entertain a motion.
Can I ask a question?
Pedro? Yeah.
Julianne, when you first started reading this out, did I hear you say you were going to put a person's particular name in there or their title? There's a section at the very beginning.
You know what? Yep. If you look at the
here's my question in reference to that. Isn't it, and then I saw some as we were strolling through this stuff, isn't it I guess my question is that typical, or is it you kind of generalize this for less maintenance?
Well, it has to do with board policy 520 and the harassment policy. The harassment policy is actually contained within each of these handbooks.
Right.
And within the harassment policy on an annual basis, the district is required to identify a non-discrimination coordinator and a complaint manager. And so whenever those people change over, their names are actually in the board policy, and then we update the policy. And then subsequently, when the handbooks are updated, then we update them at that time. So it is unusual to have a name and not a position, but in these specific cases, that's what we're required to do.
Okay, all right. Just wondering what's good there. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll entertain a motion that the Board of Education approve the recommended changes to the Educational Support Staff Handbook, Food Service Handbook, and Bus Driver Handbook as presented on first reading.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
And a roll call.
Mrs. Farber,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk,
Aye.
Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas. Mr. Rivas?
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. We'll move on to J6, approval of policies for press first reading.
Yes, thank you, President Sparber. Before I get into all of them and highlight some of the updates, I wanted to get a little feedback from board members. We did have a different printer that was used. Were you able to see the green and the pinks and the reds any better this time? Thumbs up. Were you able to? Good. Okay, because we tried to, I know the last one, we ended up having a number of questions. So with policies being challenging as it is, wanted to try to make sure that it's clear what we're looking for changes on each of them. And so as I go through, I will share some of the highlights. I'll share the policy first and give you a minute in which to get to that policy. But the first one is the first policy, policy 22125, board member compensation and expenses. So on that one, the question number one is in regard to reimburse board member baggage fees if they travel or fly. And so the default answer is yes on that one. So we would always want, if our board members are going to a conference or a workshop and needed baggage for travel, that they'd be reimbursed. What I'll do is, if you don't mind, I'll go through them and then make a little pause in between. And if there are questions, feel free to go ahead and ask the questions. Second one is 2160, which is board attorney. The board attorney, this one gives us the right to have multiple board attorneys, and that we, then there's also a couple changes for updates and footnotes at the bottom, as you can see down under press +1. So that is recommended. The next one is 560, board expenses. Sorry, did I miss one? Yeah, 450. I'm sorry, Tim. We're all going to get dizzy. 450, the payment procedures. Just a footnote is updated, so that one's fine. When you don't see any red or green within the body of the actual policy, and you see the blue or the red down at the bottom, those either are footnotes or legal updates that have been changed. So 560 is expenses. And as I noted, that one relates back to 2125, which is the baggage, also for travel. So that one is also recommended. So that question is default for yes for board travel to be reimbursed. 590, abused and neglected child reporting. The one note in here that is a little different that it talks about is the change to make sure that if we do have a children's advocacy center in our county, that we're required to communicate with them. And we do have a children's advocacy center in Kane County. So the answer would be yes. It's not a question, but just the update is yes. We would make sure that we follow up with the child advocacy or children's advocacy center to report as needed. Personnel records, 5/150. As you can see, there's nothing in the body that's updated, so they're legal updates and cross-reference footnotes. 5/280, duties and qualifications is the same. Those are footnotes and legal updates at the bottom. There's one change to the educator licensure that Dr. Atkins is aware of, and we'll make sure that that's understood by everybody. Accelerated placement program. In this one of the recommended changes is not the recommended changes, but the advocacy pieces to make sure that you have your accelerated programming online. And we do through our student handbooks or through our student course books. So as we have course books, those course books are all put online for parents and students to see. So we meet the requirement of that. Next one is 6/280, Tim. Grading and promotion. This one has park as a requirement for graduation. And as you see up in the green, it's removed park because, as you know, the park test has changed and those tests will continue to change. So they're probably wise just to keep the terms park or the specific test out of there, but keep it more relegated to whatever updated tests that they have. 770, Tim. Attendance and truancy. Question 1 is relates to also policy 790, which we'll get to in a second. This one talks about students being released to be able to vote. Those that are of age in the voting cycle, they're able to be released during the school day to vote. So that is updated, but then in the next one, 790, Tim, there is the flexibility of parameters for the language. So yes, we believe in it, but what we want to do is when the polls open at 7, have our students recommended that they go from 7 to 9 or as otherwise scheduled with the Kaneland High School administration. So with that, our goal is either have it do it first thing in the morning so they can vote, then come to school, stay for the duration of the day, or if based on their schedule, they think there's a different time during the day towards the end of the day that might be better for their schedule and their availability, and based on what they're doing that day, a test and assessment. They have that flexibility built in with administration. And that is one to make sure that we're covered on that. I did check with Maureen on, and that is one that's recommended that we do accept it, yes, but with the additional language that we have added in there. Student rights and responsibilities, 7/130. As again, you can see, just as a reminder in the body, there aren't any changes. They're down at the bottom, so it's footnotes and endnotes. Same with 7/325, which is the next one. Just a 5-year review. Then 810, connection with the community. It's just changing the wording to put the word platform in there. Make it more current with what's happening with social media. And that's obviously fine to update that. Doesn't change just changes the wording. Visitors and conduct on school property. This one does have, it's fine and it's okay. The only note would be down on the second page in green, Tim, under child sex offender, down a little bit there. There is reasonable access to allow associations to meet during the day with other associations to do member association work. So we checked with Maureen on that one, and it is passed and we have to do it. So it says here with reasonable access to employees. So we'll talk with KEA and speak, and we'll determine what the reasonable access is to make sure that we're not leaving students, just like the buses, students unattended or classes without somebody to instruct them. Then 880, gifts to the district. That's just a 5-year review, change the footnotes at the bottom. And the last one is public suggestions and concerns. This is updated for a couple different reasons. Their technology, email is based on policy 6235, is for the function of the district and for the function of academic welfare of students. So there are some changes in here to talk about the fact that the communication should be limited to relevant individuals. What's happened is there are some times where vendors get a hold of this and they're using it to either contact students, they're contacting families, and or families at times emailing staff, and they're emailing the entire staff about certain items or matters that have to do with their student. So what this is doing is trying to ensure that it's not a public forum in which a parent or a family member, community, vendor, somebody can't regularly use our email access to staff or students just for their general purposes. So this kind of has some language in there to identify and outline that to the best for students and for security for students and staff. So that one was actually benign in nature compared to the last couple that had 20, 30, or 40 policy updates, but there were 2 or 3 that had questions. And again, like we typically do with policy, this is the first reading. If there are questions for updates or questions to change anything, I would provide that and then bring it back to the next meeting on the consent and second reading. So with that, are there any questions?
No.
Thank you.
I do. I'm sorry, I couldn't get myself unmuted. Sorry. The 7 and 9 on voting. School starts what time?
7:35.
7:35.
Yes.
I guess. Why would you encourage a child to leave school?
We're not encouraging them to leave school. We're encouraged if they do want to vote and their families believe that they can vote. We would like them to vote at 7 o'clock, do it before they come to school or on their way to school. So it does have, it says a 2-hour period of time. So that's why we started at 7 o'clock in the morning and went till 9, hoping that the majority of them would have a location near them that they could do it prior to school.
Yeah, because a voting facility is obviously usually closer to your house, unless you do it beforehand. And I know it's a law that you got to allow for at least from an employee standpoint to allow your employees to go. I don't know. I just found it odd, but specifically, I guess the encouragement to do the 7 to 9, right? And they have to prove otherwise. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, that way there is flexibility built in. We're hoping that we want students in school during the course of the day. So if they can do it before school from 7 to 7:40, that's perfect. But if like a field trip or a college visit, there is the guidance for 2 hours here. So if a family student needs to be here first hour and they want them to go during a different period of the time, they do have that flexibility within those 2 hours to work that out with the administration and bring a note that would state otherwise. Or at the end of the school day, after school, on their way home, they could do it too. But it does allow for 2 hours during the day, and we were hoping that it would be 2 hours at the beginning of the day to try to get them to vote before they come to school.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, so I'll entertain a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve the recommended policy changes on first reading.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And a roll call.
Mrs. Witch,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas,
Aye.
and Mrs. Barber.
Aye, motion carries 7-0. We'll move on to the superintendent report.
Yes, thank you. I will, as a brief interjection, I will share with you my fear that during one of those updates, if I hit the mute button and I start talking and I don't look back and I don't see that anybody's waving me otherwise, every time I look back at the camera, I fear that I've just spoken for 15 minutes and nobody heard a word I said and wasn't able to update. So if I do, please wave your arms around if I'm on mute for too long and don't notice that. A couple things I want to share and update. Summer school, as you know, is all online. That is a recommendation from the state as we're It's phase 2 heading to phase 3. So we have changed that programming. And I did want to share with the board, we are excited that the numbers are up. Once, I believe some of it probably had to do with high school more primarily than other grades, but as other grade levels, as grades did go out at the end of the semester, the numbers have jumped. And I believe also based on COVID-19, there's probably more people taking advantage of summer school to earn credits, to earn back credits, and at other levels, just for extra work that they feel that maybe their son or daughter missed out during the school year. So we will see more dollars going into summer school and more students and larger sections. So that's a good thing to have more students. One other note is on the 21st, we had our foundation, the Kaneland Foundation meeting, and a couple highlights from that meeting. Number one is always the for Kaneland grants. As you recall, last year we did the Chromebook cover, so we didn't do grants. This year, the foundation decided to take action and fund grants again. So we did, as of last week, fund about 9 or 10 grants, totaling almost $7,000 or $8,000. I will provide an update on those grants probably in the weekly update, and also just share them in the KCN, and you'll hear more about those grants. So it is always exciting and seeing and hearing those grants. And this year the grants were hopefully the goal and specified to Kaneland Connects, the strategic plan, and or personalized learning. So you'll see and hear when I share the grants, a lot of them are along those lines. The other highlight from the foundation meeting, as we continue our engagement activity with Marquette Hamlin Group, they provided 2 or 3 updates. With one of them that we're looking forward to is an NIU intern through NIU's master's program in government and foundation work. We'll have we'll be interviewing, the foundation will be interviewing shortly by the end of June probably, to secure an intern for 2 years. And then during those 2 years, the intern will act as not an executive director by title, but take on a lot of those roles and responsibilities shared with myself and Dr. Fuchs and Stephanie Butler, who's the current president of the Kaneland Foundation. So we're excited to see that, and we'll eventually send a picture of him or her out or introduce them also. They will also, Marquette Hamlin is going to be overseeing and providing some feedback and direction on the social media side. So into the summer, you should see more social media coming out from the foundation. They also are providing updates on our alumni database. If you'll recall, we've had a alumni database that's really not a working alumni database. It's one where we just continue to compile the names and haven't done anything really with it to an extent. So there were over 13,500 names in there that they have just finished culling that list. And so if you are a Kaneland grad, you may be getting a update at some point, looking for your updated information. And at some point, the foundation will start to use that alumni database to communicate and try to use it to generate additional revenue. And the last thing on the foundation, in September, we have our annual golf outing. And so one of the things we're going to be doing this year that might be different is based on phase 3 and social distancing, where we are. Phase 4 at that time, maybe in September. The golf outing may look a little different. Might be more of getting into your cart, go and play, grab a lunch on your way out. And also the live auction and the silent auction is going to be run through Marquette Hamlin Group too. So it may end up being an in-person or an online auction, which an online auction would actually be a lot of fun. That way you can incorporate more people than those that are just attending the golf outing. So those are 4 or 5 things on the foundation meeting. President Sparber or Dr. Fuchs, anything else from that meeting you want to share as an update?
Maybe just the intern piece that I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know where I'm going.
Yes, I do. I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, I think there'll be a request by the foundation that the intern is employed by the district and then paid back from the foundation. And so that's something that will be coming. I just wanted to put that out there just in case anyone had any thoughts, because I would imagine it will show up, that request will probably show up in June or July.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder, Shona.
Or you can see when it comes, yeah.
Yes. The other thing too is then, as you know, our students picked up all of their supplies, their personal supplies, their personal effects from their lockers or classrooms. We are going to keep those that weren't picked up. We've communicated with parents. We'd like them to come and pick them up. So if parents don't come in, we have them stored and labeled. We can give them back to the families in the fall. And then at some point, we'll continue to communicate with parents as we typically do to try to get those back in their students' hands or in their families' hands, especially if there's something of value that they really need to get. We have them tagged and identified to get back to their families. Then lastly, in June, late June or early July, I think I shared this in the weekly update too, we are going to meet over the next 3 or 4 weeks with cabinet and ad team, and then also communicate with our teachers as we get feedback from the surveys from remote learning that closes this Friday. So we have hopefully staff feedback and teacher and parent feedback and student feedback on how remote learning went. And we will start to put together the plan for next fall. And as you know, it's going to be slightly tenuous because we don't exactly know what latitude that we're going to have starting in August and September. But there will be multiple plans with variances to put in as far as on-site remote learning, varied days of A days, B days, how we disperse students, the safety mechanisms that we'll have in place, those types of things. So that is under review. And again, our goal is end of June, first week in July to have that to parents in a tentative format so parents can do the planning that they need to. We can plan the staffing, we can plan the buildings that will make sure that students are on site as often as possible, but also as safely as possible too. So thank you for picking time to hear all of those. That's all I have, President Sparber.
Okay. Dr. Fuchs, anything from you?
I don't have any updates for tonight. Thank you.
Great. So we'll move on to topics for future agendas. Any topics?
I don't know if this is a topic or a weekly update, but I'm interested in knowing how we support our LGBTQ plus students, both in terms of like policy and just like what we do for them, and if we need to take a look at that and review it in any way.
Probably all grade levels. I'm just trying to think if there's anything, or do you need any additional information, Todd? Or
I would think all grade levels is fine. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
so is this something a Friday update you think, or a?
You know, I don't know. Maybe it starts at a Friday update. That might be the best place to start. And then if it needs to evolve from there, maybe.
Aaron, are you, Aaron and the board, I want to make sure that it's, again, a straw poll of thumbs up. What,
sure.
You remember in May, or maybe you don't remember, but in May, we had planned to give an update on bullying, harassment, but with COVID-19, we couldn't get the administrators together and it'd be a tough presentation to have. So if you don't mind, if we wait, we can include the LGBTQ portion, the student presentation or the deans and discipline and SEL.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's a great pairing. So that, yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
I guess along those lines, I meant to ask you and I didn't. What are the odds that we're meeting in person in June?
Please, God, please.
As a board? As a board?
Yeah.
Yes.
Anything above 0? Or
we'll
no?
have to, I think we'll have to talk about that because I think the next guidance is what, 10 or fewer?
Yeah.
Right.
For phase 3. So I guess we'll talk.
We'll talk.
To make sure we're in compliance, we could have those that, what I wouldn't want to do is say who's interested and have 2 or 3 people not be able to come just because of sheer numbers, but I also want to be in compliance. So
yeah. But to your point, we don't see a way like this presentation of that being live because we couldn't have those people come in.
Right, and I would rather have that presentation be live because I imagine there will be a lot of data shared, there'll be a lot of feedback and a lot of board questions. So that one would be one that I've tentatively scheduled to hold off until we are in person. So even if it's August or September, I would like that one to be in person because the assistant principals will do a great job and the deans, and I would like the Q&A for the board to be able to follow up too.
Okay, so that seems like, so can we do everyone else a thumbs up? Everyone's not as high tech as Aaron. Yeah, we'll add Aaron's topic on to the bullying, etc. Is that all good?
Yep.
Yep. Yes, okay, I think I've heard enough yeses, so.
Yep, I saw enough.
Any other topics for future agendas?
I am interested to find out the option that our seniors that are left, they had an option of purchasing their Chromebooks and whatever elements went along with it. And I understand the bag went with it as well. But my question along those, obviously, how many took advantage of that? And two, how are we going to replenish? There's a grade level somewhere that's going to have to be replenished. And I don't know if we covered this topic before, whether the fees take care of it or not. And if so, what that number is, if it's different than what the fees that are being picked up from everybody else.
Is that a Friday update, you think?
It could be, yeah, sure, I think.
Yeah, that could, as again, providing that there's board members, and happy to always do that, but I know the part of the agreement was to make sure that there was a consensus among the board for the topics. So as I would imagine board members would want to hear that data, but if there is that consensus, I could easily do it in a weekly update.
Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, yep. Enough, I think. Perfect. Any other ones?
No, thank you.
Okay, and so the second opportunity for public comment, we don't have any tonight. We do have an executive session. Let's see if I can find all my notes. So the Board of Education is scheduled for closed session where there will be no action taken following the session. Therefore, after the vote to go into closed session, the recording of tonight's meeting will be concluded. Tonight, we are expected to go into closed session for Illinois Code 122C1, as well as Illinois Code 122C2. Is there a motion to go into executive session for these reasons?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
And a roll call.
Mrs. Junk,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Mr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak,
Aye.
Mr. Rivas,
Aye. Sorry.
Mrs. Barber,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. All right, so we'll go into closed session.
Thank you, everybody.